Hello and welcome to this week's edition of What's in the Night Sky. I'm Hayley and this week I'm going to talk about how to observe the moon in the daytime, the Galilean moons of Jupiter and the constellation of Lyra, the Harp. Let's begin on Monday the 15th of June at around 11 p.m. and let's just move time onwards and see what time the moon is rising on Monday. And you'll see it's starting to peak over the horizon here at around 3 a.m. Now that's not very much before the sun rises, so the moon is not very well placed for observing on Monday night, and actually as the week goes on the situation gets worse. So observing the moon at night time this week isn't going to be an easy task. That doesn't mean that you have to miss out completely on observing the moon this week. If you would still like to have a look, then you could have a go at observing it during the daytime. The best day to do that is on Monday. Let's go to around 10 a.m. on Monday. And the reason for that is as the week goes on, if I just move to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you'll see that the moon is getting closer and closer to the sun. And you don't want to be trying to observe the moon when it's too close to the sun, because that could be quite dangerous. It's important, if you are observing during the day, that you make sure that you don't accidentally look at the sun either with your naked eye or with a pair of binoculars or a telescope, because that could damage your vision. So it's important to have an awareness of where the sun is and make sure that you're not going to accidentally catch a glimpse of it. If we go back to Monday, zoom in, let's have a look at the phase. And you'll see that on Monday the moon is a crescent phase, and during the daytime features are harder to pick out against the sunlit sky. You won't have the contrast that you would have at night time, but you may still be able to spot some of the lunar seas, which are the dark areas of basaltic rock that we've talked about in previous episodes. And you'll see that as the week goes on, the moon is waning towards new, and on Sunday we have new moon, at which time it will be really close to the sun. So let's move on and have a look at the planets now. So I'm going to take us back to Monday night. Here we go, Monday night around 11 p.m. And again I'm going to just move time onwards, and you'll see that Jupiter and Saturn are starting to lift over the horizon at around midnight, and when we get to around 2 a.m. they'll be nice and high and reasonably well placed to observe, or as well placed to observe as they're going to be this week. And you can see Mars trailing behind as well. Let's this week have a bit of a closer look at Jupiter. And I thought we could take the opportunity to talk about Jupiter's moons this week. So if you have a pair of binoculars or a small telescope, you should be able to see that Jupiter's 4 Galilean moons, Io's just hiding behind Jupiter at the moment, will look like little pinpricks of light with a pair of binoculars or a small telescope surrounding Jupiter. And Jupiter actually has over 60 known moons, but the 4 that we can see here, let's just move time on a bit so we can see Io as well. The 4 that we can see here are the largest, and they're actually quite fascinating worlds in their own right. And we can't make out very much surface detail with ground-based telescopes, but missions to Jupiter have revealed huge amounts about these 4 moons. And let's have a little talk about each one in turn. So if we go to Europa, and we know that Europa is an icy world, and it's got a surface that's been crisscrossed with cracks and fractures, and it's thought to have a subsurface liquid ocean which contains twice as much water as all of Earth's oceans combined, making it a candidate for life elsewhere in the solar system, which is pretty exciting. Let's have a look at Io next. So Io is closest to Jupiter, and it's the most volcanically active body in the solar system, and can send plumes of lava many miles high into its atmosphere. It has over 400 active volcanoes on the surface. And the activity that it experiences, all of these active volcanoes, is due to a gravitational tug of war that's going on between it and Jupiter and other neighbouring moons near to Io. Ganymede is actually the largest moon in the solar system, and it's bigger than the planet Mercury. So if Ganymede was not orbiting Jupiter and was orbiting the Sun, it would very easily be classified as a planet. It is also thought to have a subsurface ocean, so another potential candidate for life elsewhere in the solar system other than on the Earth. And it's also the only moon in the solar system that has a magnetic field as well. So Ganymede is a really interesting object to study. And finally, Callisto, which is the most heavily cratered object in the solar system. And again, it's thought that it may have a subsurface liquid ocean. So that's 3 of the 4 Galilean moons are thought to have possible subsurface liquid ocean, which is very exciting. There's lots and lots still to be found out about these moons, and the European Space Agency has a mission planned to visit these moons. It's called the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, or JUICE, and it's planned to be launched in 2022, and it will get to the Jupiter system in around 2030. And it will hopefully look at all of these moons in more detail. Well, Callisto, Ganymede and Europa in more detail, and eventually find itself in orbit around Ganymede. So that's something exciting to look out for over the next few years. Now, the 4 largest moons are named the Galilean Moons because they were discovered by the astronomer Galileo on the 7th of January 1610, so over 400 years ago. And during the weeks after his discovery, Galileo watched as the moons orbited around the planet Jupiter. And if we change our date here to the 7th of January 1610, we should be able to get an idea of what he saw. So here we are in 1610, let's centre on Jupiter. And let's speed up time a little bit. There we go. So as Galileo watched, he saw that the moons were changing position over time. He came back night after night and plotted the positions of the planets. Plotted the positions of the moons as they orbited the planet. And he was able to come to the conclusion that the moons were in fact orbiting Jupiter, which at the time was a momentous discovery because it was the first direct evidence that objects in the solar system can orbit something other than the Earth. And in Galileo's time, it was still thought by most people that the Earth was the centre of the universe and that everything else orbited around it. So this was a pretty controversial idea in 1610. And a nice activity that you could do this week is you could observe the planet Jupiter with your binoculars or a small telescope and sketch out the positions of the 4 moons, and then you could come back later in the week or in the coming weeks and plot out the positions again and see how they change over time, just as Galileo did over 400 years ago. So let's move on to our constellation of the week this week, which is Lyra, the Harp. So we'll take our time back from 1610 to 2020. And let's go back to around midnight on Monday the 15th of June. And you'll see that Lyra, the Harp, is nice and high in the summer sky. And it's dominated by the star Vega, which is really bright. It's the 3rd brightest star in the night sky, after Sirius and Arcturus, so it shouldn't be too difficult to spot. And it's one of the 3 stars of the Summer Triangle asterism, and that's along with Altair and Deneb. So here we go, Vega, Altair and Deneb make the summer triangle asterism. So 3 stars in 3 separate constellations make that asterism. And if I just take the constellation lines away and put the asterism lines on instead, there we go, you can see the summer triangle here. And the summer triangle is a good thing to try and spot if you're wanting to see if you can see the Milky Way. If you're in a reasonably dark spot and you want to try and see the Milky Way, then pick out the summer triangle first, and the Milky Way passes through the summer triangle. So the summer triangle is a good pointer to help you find the way. Okay, let's take those off and let's put our normal constellation lines back on. So Lyra is associated with the Greek musician Orpheus, who played a harp-like instrument, and he was so gifted that his music was said to even charm the trees and the streams and the stones. And after his death, Zeus sent an eagle to retrieve his harp, and it was placed in the heavens along with Orpheus himself. If you would like to try and spot some objects within the Lyra constellation with a pair of binoculars, an interesting object is this star here, and this star is known as the double double. And if you have a pair of binoculars, you should be able to fairly easily resolve the fact that it isn't one star but 2. And if you had access to a reasonable sized telescope, you would be able to resolve each of these 2 stars into a further 2 stars, which is why it's known as the double double. And the other thing you might notice this week while you're exploring Lyra is there is a minor meteor shower called the June Lyrids, which has its radiant in Lyra. So you may spot a meteor or 2 while you are looking at Lyra, and it has a peak of only around 3 meteors per hour, so you won't be spotting lots and lots of meteors, but if you're lucky, you might spot 1 or 2. Okay, so that brings me to the end of our night sky tour for this week, and I'll be back again with more next week.